So I want to discuss sexual orientation. And while this seems like a simple topic, it's not. Not at all. What are you
I'm
doing?
just being silly. Continue.
Thank you. Like let's just interrupt Zena's brain. So I find myself explaining to a lot of people a lot of different parts of sexual orientation. Especially when I work with people, or not work with, but when I, comment on posts nowadays with people coming out or their partners are coming out as something or other. So when we think of sexual orientation, there is a lot of ways to think about this because there's sexual orientation and this is mine, okay? This is how I think about it in my head, and this is how it defines me, right? Which that would be great if that was where that ended. Okay, that would be simple. But the other thing to keep in mind with sexual orientation is that we also use this to communicate to other people what we're interested in, okay? So now we have a whole other layer where we've got to interact with others with this concept, okay? And then also, there's sexual orientation in terms of community, right? Okay, you've got the gay community, the pan community. You've got subreddits for r/lots of different things, okay? And so now you have a whole community large thing around this. So now sexual orientation is not just something going on inside yourself, okay? But it is the framework for a very large group interaction now, okay? And so I think when we're talking about sexual orientation, it's important to know kind of how we're using it in that way. Does that kind of following there?
Yeah.
So questions I see a lot. Okay, my partner came out as trans. Does that change my sexual orientation? And so I think Jess and I have had an interesting, time with this one because the answer could be yes or no, depending on, how you think of that question. Do you want to give some info about kind of your stuff with it?
Yeah, I'll give some of my stuff. I'll give a counter example as well. So one of the things that was really hard for me, and this is where mental illness and SO can sometimes cross over, is I have a really hard time with men. And particularly I have a hard time with men because of trauma within my family, but also just dysphoria. This doesn't come out as any kind of prejudice or issue, but it does come out as a little bit of a wariness. Now, there are men I absolutely trust with my life, so there are people that bypass that resistance. But when Zena started more adopting and taking on the more trans-mask aspects of their identity, I had really hard time with it. You'd think being a therapist and someone who's done a shit ton of mental health work and learning and all this stuff would have made me prepared for that. The answer to that is no, that's not how borderline works. Go fuck yourself. For me, what happened is I started having panic attacks and feeling really, really, really rough because this was the order of operations in the borderline brain. It was Zena's going to come out as transmask. That means Zena's going to be a man. That means Zena's going to hurt me. And then I'm going to need to leave, which means I lose the relationship. And so for me, that got really hard. And eventually, when I started coming to terms with that, I did therapy, stuff like that. Initially, what I sort of came to was sapphic pan. And you'll hear earlier videos on our channel, I'll mention I feel sapphic pan. That is, I'm pansexual. I can generally find, anyone of any gender attractive. I just generally go towards anyone who's femme adjacent. I still feel like that's a pretty accurate description in a lot of cases, but I've actually kind of now just settled on lesbian. And while both of those are true, my reasoning at the time was that I needed to find a way to include both parts of Zena because saying sapphic felt like it was ignoring the transmask portions, and so not having it pan, or not having some aspect of panness didn't include things as well. So it felt like I needed to account for that. Now I've come to a different line of thinking, which I think is where Zena's going. So I can explain more about that later. But Yeah, that's kind of where the initial thoughts were.
Yeah. The having your sexual orientation, at least what you communicate to other people, being something that would definitely include where my gender had kind of shifted and you know.
Yeah, it was a descriptive statement, right? I was trying to describe what our relationship was rather than being like, how do I identify? Because to me, that's a much more, we've had these conversations, but to me, that's a much more useful metric.
Right. Well, they say different things, right? The what's going on with me internally, right, versus, you know, what I'm communicating to the outside world about my available dating pool is another thing. You know, I know, especially at the beginning of our relationship, there was a lot of like, are we in each other's dating pools? Are we? Because especially at the time, you know, definitely lesbian. This was pre like everything. You know, and so no, I had to be very clear with people that like lesbian for me always included trans people. Okay, and I kept that very open and very broad because, you know, already having a lot of friends at various points in transition, like, no, I don't particularly care too hard where you're at in transition if you're non-binary, right? I wanted to keep that open. And I actually got a lot of shit for it. There's definitely a number of people that wanted to like not make me a lesbian anymore. And I'm like,
yeah, the removal of the lesbian card shit.
Oh yeah. Well, my mom just lost her goddamn mind, I think, for a lot of reasons. Like she suddenly could not comprehend, you know, what was going on. I think it seemed to me like she had built up such an identity for her around her being the proud mom of a lesbian, right? And like, you know, doing support work and activism and being involved in the community as, you know, a support person, right? She'd built up so much of an identity around this that when my sexual orientation and what I was actively doing didn't line up anymore, at least in her mind, I'd been saying this stuff about like, no, really, like I include trans and non-binary people in my open dating pool here for years. Like, it's not like she didn't know, but she never got it together. Anyways, so when things when she actually was confronted with that, no, it kind of broke, right? Things kind of stopped making sense, I think. You know, and so I think it's important to recognize like the internal descriptive part of sexual orientation, my internals and how I'm attraction may or may not, you know, it can shift over time, certainly, right? We can learn new parts and new things of ourselves. But it doesn't necessarily have to change just because your partner is exploring their gender. Okay, and so we can get into some really messiness where, you know, I'm still attracted to what I'm attracted to. Like, there's just a natural thing that comes up of this thing is really hot, awesome, or this thing evokes, you know, feelings of friendship for me, especially if you're ace, all right, or you're demi, okay. And so we can get really messy, you know, when our partner is shifting. So your sexual orientation may or may not, you know, need a word. Okay, you may have to just be like, no, this might be a little bit dissonant, right? It might seem a little bit contradictory, but just be accepting that, like, this is still a person that I care about and still love, right? In this, and that's something I deal with. And certainly there are some relationships, you know, where the whole kind of paradigm of the relationship shifts and that's not really compatible anymore. That can also happen.
Yeah, that kind of gets into where I kind of ended up, is that so for a while I just sat with sapphic pan, and the problem with that is that the more I sat with that, the more the pan part didn't make sense. Now, don't get me wrong, best flag out of all of them.
Oh yeah.
But the concern that I had is that it wasn't fully descriptive. Well, I can find men attractive. I generally don't find them sexually attractive. I tend to find them more in that aesthetic quality. Natalie summed it up really well in her shame video where she talked about like looking at them like a Grecian column. I can find something beautiful but not want to fuck it, right? For me, I think the problem is that I wanted to find a description that made sense, and I don't really feel super connected or like attached to an identity. So what I did was I sat down again and I said, okay, what is the description of my interactions? And while I can't say that, you know, 10 years ago when I was closeted and very much repressed, you know, I was a lesbian at that time, if I want to describe the relationship I'm in now and the people I interact with on a more flirty level and things like that, no, it's absolutely lesbianic. That is regardless of what Zena's gender is, our relationship, that is the way we interact together, the way that it arises, the way we are sexually with one another, the way we are emotionally with one another, is a lesbian relationship. It feels like that quality.
It's got such a large feminine overtone, right? That really is like the through line in there. So that's a big part of it, right? And that's, for some reason, I never gave up the lesbian parts, right? Especially, the non-binary and trans parts are a very large part of me, but I never gave up lesbian. There was always some part of me that was like, for me, being, in a femme role, sort of, so to speak, and being in a femme interaction with the other person, that really does it for me. That really makes sense. That's somehow a part of me, right? And that part of me also needs, honoring just as much as the transmasc part does. And so that's kind of where I'm definitely on the, like, so here's where things get more messy, okay? Our language for sexual orientations isn't great. Because some of our words for sexual orientations describe the gender of the person, okay, and also the person that they are attracted to. All right? But they are very simple terms. A gay man, okay? All right? And typically, gay could mean a couple different things, but for this, gay men, okay? It says a man in love with a man, right? But we know that you can be non-binary. You could be trans, right? And so there's all sorts of ways to be a man in there, all right? If you are attracted to, or not attracted to, but if, you find yourself more in the femboy category, where does your sexual orientation fit, right? You're kind of in a wibbly-wobbly area as far as some of these larger terms are concerned.
Well, not to mention, what are people's orientation towards you? Are they attracted to the feminine as though you're a woman?
Right?
Right. This is the big question of, like, this is a femboy question around, like, what is the difference between a femboy and a trans woman? The difference being is femboys can take that stuff off.
Well, I think about it too as like the base core gender, right? For a trans woman, like the basic core is different. No, really, woman is here, right? Femboy tends to be no, the boy part is still very much a thing. Right. And so where was I? Oh yeah. The other example being lesbian, right? There's a big thing with people criticizing bi pan lesbians. Well, when you start adding in a lot of the non-binary people,
him lesbians, that's a big one.
I am this close away from being a him lesbian. I'm going to be real here, okay? So if you want to go criticize him lesbians, just
come at me.
Yeah, come at me. Right? I'm transmasc. I like am and they them, and I'm just not big on he him pronouns. I'm just not. But I'm this close away from that. All right, like there's not really a functional difference here, and I know that. But again, I'm in the non-binary. There's this large part of me that needs that femme relationship. Okay? So no, I'm still going to take lesbian here. And by pan, we know that there's, some wiggle room. Now here's the thing. Again, if we come back to sexual orientation as I am communicating to other people what my possibilities are, and also I am communicating, for myself what naturally arises in my orientation, then yeah, there's a bit of wiggle room in there, right? Okay, and so a lot of the intent is that, I'm largely on the lesbian side of things and looking for, that femme, woman loving woman thing, but also there's a lot of wiggle room in there. And so bi pan lesbian totally makes sense with all of that. Okay? So that's some of the messiness. And then not to mention, we have communities around this stuff. Hooray! Let's go make it more complicated. Okay, we've got different lesbian communities. Some of them are accepting, some of them aren't. There are certain, affectations or creatures or animals associated with different, communities, or just jokes that have arisen on the internet that you may or may not identify with. Maybe you identify with dragons, maybe you don't. I saw a thread on r/pan going, wait, what animal are we? Which one do we get? And I think there was suggestions of, what is it, satyr, goat, I'm trying to remember.
Seder, you mean?
Seder, yeah. So there's a few pronunciations. There's a few others in there that were also pandas, okay. And someone else was like, I don't like pandas. Let's try something else. And so you get these weird, kind of fun, like community things, right? And that's can also make sexual orientation hard, especially if you fit into that neat. If you don't, it might be a little weird, okay?
I feel like panda doesn't work, particularly because pandas hate fucking, and that does not describe the pan community by any stretch of the imagination.
I love the people that come in and like high pancakes. It's really cool. It's just really cute. I just think a bunch of pancakes are really cute. And then there's like somebody that does art that has like pancakes with kitties on it, and it's really cute, okay? But again, our sexual orientation can be a little rough there. And so my hope is that, if you're in some of these larger communities, if you're part of the big gay community, try to be open, try to be willing to be like, hey, let's bring, let's be open and considerate and bring kind of more people into the fold. Right. I think some people are afraid that like this term will get so watered down. But I mean, there already is kind of a lot of congregating in a large group. And I guess I'm very much on I would rather be accepting and have more people in to share experiences with, than I would have somebody kind of alone on an island and feeling lost and stuck. Because certainly a lot of us have been in that place, right? Trying to figure stuff out on your own, can't find community, can't find anything. And it would suck to be that way just because, like, your orientation doesn't fit into like some larger weird definition,
No, I find that, as we've said on this channel before, I am highly skeptical of any kind of fucking gatekeeping because it always feels authoritarian to me. And I recognize when I used to do it when I was younger, that's exactly what it is. It's the urge to control. By having an in-group, out-group, you are maintaining a certain level of control. It's why we kick out transphobes out of our Discord, because that is a means of control. We are trying to make it so people who are harmful aren't there because we're trying to control the atmosphere to stay, relatively clean, trans-friendly, and safe. The thing here is that, at least to some degree, the problem that I have is that these purity tests, these ways of true lesbians, actual lesbians, that kind of stuff, these always feel like cope. And I don't mean that in the mental health sense, though I guess I do too, but more in the sense of cope in the sense when we make fun of people on Twitter, it's cope. It's people basically wanting to essentially feel like their thing is still special, that their thing still has this very rigid idea attached to it. But I think this just does more harm than good. If someone's a trans mask envy, and they really like dudes, and they fuck a gay cis guy, right? That's gay sex in my mind. The description of that scenario, especially depending on how the people behave, how the energy of it feels, and in this case, energy, I mean the overall je ne sais quoi of the experience.
Yeah.
That's fucking gay. Like that's uber gay. That is as Lady Gaga is to sequins, that is too gay. And, like, I feel like when we're talking about this, that's where I kind of come at it from. And as Zena's saying is, like, let's keep that open. I 100% agree. I also want to invite you to consider, what are we doing? Because I can make it really clear. Like, if two trans men go at it, that's gay sex. If your partner is a trans woman and you're a cis woman, what does it feel like to the two of you? Maybe that trans girl doesn't have a lot of dysphoria, so it still feels like heterosexual sex. That might be something that just you have to contend with. There is such a thing as queer heterosexuality. But the fact is that I think we need to stop looking at these as prescriptive statements, ways in which we sort of lock down and try to keep people out. Because as Zena said, they just hurt people.
Yeah.
And instead go descriptively and like, okay, what the hell are we doing?
Well, right, because the idea being is, being able to honor yourself and your partner in those moments, right? I think that's really a big one. is the big thing here, right? If you're with a trans woman, like, no, you got to honor her in the way that she needs that, right? And there's probably a way that you need to be honored in that situation too. So actually being able to kind of go, okay, well, how do we reach that, right? I think it's pretty big.
Yeah.
If you have more on that, or
I think the only thing I'll say is that, and this might be another conversation for another day, but there is a way in which I also think people should hold sexuality more loosely. And the reason for that is this, and this is probably going to upset people. At some point, the terms stop mattering. They matter until they don't. And in this sense, for the law to recognize same-sex relationships is incredibly important because it allows people of similar sexes to be able to engage in that legal contract, right? But when you start actually getting into the real deconstruction of gender, sexuality kind of gets real wibbly wobbly, which is why I entertain the notion of a descriptive statement, because if we use prescriptive statements, we get gatekeeping. And so I guess there's a thing to talk about is like, okay, in our perfect world, transness and queerness, incredibly, incredibly aggressively, what happens to sexuality in that world? Because some people are very attached to those terms. Those terms are really important. They had to fight for the ability to be that term. And I don't think we should take that away from them in any way, shape, or form. But I also think on a philosophical level, there's a big question about, does this actually meaningfully describe me? I win a sapphic pan. I still do at times. I go as a lesbian. Still do at times. Mm-hmm. Do these accurately describe my entire experience of sex or being in a relationship? No. And that's another part of sexual orientation I think is a thing that we don't talk about enough is, and again, thank you, ACE people, for giving us fucking language for this.
Right.
But we don't talk enough about, like, homoromantic relationships. Like, yeah, you might really just like, if you're a trans man, you might really just like fucking girls. Girls. But the thing is that that's not just that. There's a difference between being a lesbian and having homoromantic feelings for another woman and being able to be in that kind of relationship. Because that, even though those relationships are normalized, fine, safe, yada, yada, they are also have their own energy, their own culture, their own mood, yada, yada. And I think that's something to really consider is that in some ways, when we talk about orientation, we're not just talking about where you put which body part. We're talking about how do you relate? How do you engage? Because that's really what it is. For most people that don't know ACE lingo, guess what? They're conflating those things.
Yeah.
Just like cis people do sex and gender, they're conflating romance, the romantic side, with the sexual side. I know for a fact one of my friends is absolutely bisexual, will absolutely fuck dudes, but he doesn't date men. He's not homoromantic. He's heteroromantic, but bisexual. Dudes are to fuck, not to date. Fish are friends, not food. Like, it's this, I think there's a larger discussion there is all I'm saying. So
yeah, no, I'm definitely with you. And that's somewhere in this too, right? Sexual orientation, there's this contention between, okay, this as a descriptor for myself versus this is a really big, massive identity that defines me, right? I'd say you define your sexual orientation, but we kind of, as we go through all of this, we kind of have to hold those parts of us, and somehow find a way to balance that hey, this lesbian thing might be an identity, it might be my connection to community, but also I might have some wiggle room internally. And like, we gotta give, sorry, I have a little bit of rant here. It's perfectly fine for people to switch between, gay, bi, lesbian, pan, whatever else, what have you.
Bookmark identity.
Right. If you need to figure out what's going on, or you're like, maybe this was true for me 10 years ago, but right now this isn't true anymore. Cool. Like, shift around. It's all good. And like, fucking let people shift around. Okay. There's been a number of times where I've had, teens, tell me one thing one year and then they're like, I think I'm this actually. And I'm like, all right, cool. I just, crochet more things for them. That's all. That's all it means. So All right, and this one from my youth here to our young people, there were a number of times where there was concern with people coming out as identities that they weren't. Okay, particularly coming out as bi if they weren't bi. And I do know that this happened a couple of times, and it did irk me when I was in high school. And then once I thought about why would that be a thing, I understood that for some kids, this was safety for them. Okay, this was, parents would at least be somewhat okay and not hostile if this kid came out as bi, because at least in the parents' minds, they would be halfway still they could still be heterosexual, okay? And it was a mess. It would, let me tell you, parents that think that way are just, stop it, okay? But again, these are kids that are stuck in that situation. You don't get to choose your parents. And so, like, I'm never going to fault a kid for needing to, you know, find some way to honor parts of themselves and still have to stay safe, okay?
I highly recommend people watch our video called Bookmark Identities.
Oh,
this
absolutely.
is exactly this discussion is. Sometimes you have to come out of things because it's all the information you've got, and sometimes you're holding that identity because you need time to make that happen. I can think of a number of scenarios where I've had clients who were non-binary because that was less of a shock than them being binary trans in some certain situations.
Well, and certainly, yeah, for me, like, I don't always have language for how all the non-binary stuff works. You all are meeting me much later, okay, in my journey with this stuff, right? You're not seeing me at 19 when somebody said the word to me for the first time, and I was like, is that what I've been doing for the last, like, 10 years of my life? Or, like, actually my whole life up until now? Like, is that what that is? That's the word here? Like, I don't know, you're getting me at, like, you know, almost 30 here talking about this stuff, all right? So I'm going to have a lot different perspective here. But again, I want to let people just be, and I never want to criticize somebody or, like, you know, gatekeep in a way where they are getting stuck, or somehow my language is preventing them from doing their self-exploration either, you know? And I think that's kind of some of the stuff that I see. And I also want to invite everybody else to, you know, figure out you, right? Figure out what feels natural, what feels good. Figure out what feels good for you and your partners, whatever the case may be. You know, that's the whole point of sexual orientation is, you know, how do you express yourself and how do you feel and how do you relate to other people, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, so I think
what I've got.
Yeah, I think that's what we got for now, folks. But yeah, I really want people to consider this stuff is again, like, I think there's a very real way that we can come at this stuff from a different angle and in a way that isn't so rigid as it hurts people. I think there's
absolutely,
because I just don't trust the arguments that say that, like, to not have a gate is to destroy us or destroy our abilities, and I don't think that's true. More numbers are always better. So
yeah.
So with that said, we will see you guys in the next one. Have a good time. See you later.
Bye everyone.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.